Good day, everyone. This is Mark Vello, and you're listening to Headline News. Biden admin so far has eased pressure on Communist China, says Senator Cruz. Senator Ted Cruz raised alarm over what he saw as a pattern of a systematic decision from the Biden administration to embrace Communist China. So far, every action, every nomination that we have seen from the nascent Biden administration, insofar as it concerns China, has lessened the scrutiny, has lessened the sanctions, has lessened the pressure on Communist China, Cruz said in a speech during a Senate meeting on Tuesday. We are seeing a steady and systematic embrace of Communist China, and that is dangerous. That is dangerous for our nation. It is foolhardy. Cruz opposed the confirmation of President Joe Biden's pick for Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, who he believed has joined the rush to embrace the worst elements of the Chinese Communist Party. Raimondo, the governor of Rhode Island, has refused to clarify whether she would uphold the trade restriction on Chinese telecom giant Huawei, which Cruz described as an espionage agency of the Chinese Communist Party. The Senate voted 84 to 15 Tuesday to confirm her as the coming Secretary of Commerce. Over the past 2 years under the Trump administration, the Department of Commerce placed Huawei and roughly 150 of its affiliates on the sanction list in a bid to cut the firm from critical American technology and software. The Federal Communications Commission officially designated Huawei a national security threat last June. During her January 26 confirmation hearing, Raimondo, a Democrat, pledged a hard stance on China to protect U.S. telecommunications networks from anti-competitive Chinese behaviors, but declined to say whether she would maintain the blacklist on Huawei. Pressed by Cruz, she said she would work with lawmakers, industry, and allies to make an assessment as to what's best for American national and economic security. As my colleagues know, nominees will never be more engaged, more transparent, or more forthcoming than during their confirmation process, Cruz said. That Governor Raimondo has refused to be any one of these speaks volumes to how she would act if confirmed as secretary. The Biden team has projected a tough-on-China image, but often remained elusive on details. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has described the two countries' relationship as one of strong competition, citing the need to deploy a strategic and multilateral approach when dealing with China. Catherine Tai, nominee for U.S. Trade Representative, described the Chinese regime as simultaneously a rival, a trade partner, and an outsized player whose cooperation will also need to address certain global challenges. President Joe Biden's CIA director nominee, William Burns, called Beijing a formidable authoritarian adversary, but also noted areas of mutual interests, such as climate change. Chinese officials have meanwhile escalated the rhetoric, laying out demands for the United States on issues such as trade, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and human rights as preconditions for healthy diplomatic relations. While officials from both political parties have mistaken Beijing as a friend, the COVID-19 pandemic has led the world to see the systematic pattern of lies and deception and death coming from the Chinese Communist government, Cruz said. Following the pandemic, the UK, which was on the path of allowing Huawei to build its 5G network, awakened to the regime's threats and stepped back from the brink, Cruz said. He expressed hopes that the perceived pattern of the new administration appeasing China will not lighten up on our allies and encourage them to move forward with Huawei, to allow the espionage architecture to be put in place in their nations. That would render America more vulnerable. It would render our allies more vulnerable. It would render the world more vulnerable, he said. U.S. sanctions 7 top Russian officials in response to Russia's poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. On March 2nd, in response to the poisoning of Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, the U.S. Treasury announced sanctions against 7 Russian officials, including Russian Federal Security Service Director Alexander Bortnikov. This is the first time the Biden administration imposed sanctions against Russia. U.S. intelligence agencies accused the Kremlin of attempted assassination through poisoning for political purposes. Treasury noted that in the U.S., the assets of 7 senior Russian officials will be frozen and any transactions they make in the U.S. will be prosecuted. In addition to Bortnikov, the sanctioned officials include Chief of the Presidential Policy Directorate Andrei Yarin, First Deputy Chief of Staff of the Presidential Executive Office Sergei Kiriyenko, Prosecutor General Igor Krasnov, Deputy Ministers of Defense Alexei Krivoruchko and Pavel Popov, and Federal Penitentiary Service Director Alexander Kolesnikov. The Kremlin's use of chemical weapons to silence a political opponent and intimidate others demonstrates its flagrant disregard for international norms, stated Secretary Janet L. Yellen. We join the EU in condemning Alexei Navalny's poisoning, as well as his arrest and imprisonment by the Russian government. On October 24, 2020, German doctors assessed that Navalny was poisoned by a substance called Novichok. Navalny accused Russian President Vladimir Putin of corruption, prompting mass protests. He was arrested in January on his return to Moscow from Germany and sent into exile to serve his sentence. The US and the European Union are again demanding that Russia release Navalny. These sanctions came after the foreign ministers of 27 EU member states agreed on February 22nd to impose sanctions on 4 Russian officials in response to Russia's crackdown on Navalny and his supporters. The officials sanctioned are Russia's Prosecutor General and the head of its prisons service, National Guard and Investigative Committee. In addition, the EU blacklisted 6 Russian officials last October on the grounds that Navalny was attacked with the nerve agent Novichok. Tear gas with Chinese labels are seen on the streets of Myanmar. Since the Myanmar military launched a coup on February 1st, many Myanmar people suspected that the Chinese Communist Party's support was behind the coup. Despite the CCP's repeated denials, Myanmar people picked up a tear gas bomb fired by the military during a protest in Yangon's Three Bridges district on March 2nd, and were surprised to see the description of the ammunition written in simplified Chinese. This once again sparked the anger of the Myanmar people. Myanmar's military launched a coup last month and arrested the country's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, and others, and since then mass protests in Yangon have been on the rise, and the military's crackdown has become increasingly bloody. According to UN sources, 18 people were killed by security forces on February 28th, and more than 20 people have died so far. The Myanmar people's protests did not stop because of the crackdown, and people in Yangon continued to take to the streets on the 2nd and the 3rd. People have left comments on Twitter saying that this was evidence of tyranny, and they hoped that the Chinese in Myanmar would be safe. Some people also pointed out the fact that a strong Chinese Communist Party is a disaster for the Chinese people and for the people of the world. After the coup, the Myanmar military has continued to strengthen its control over media and online speech, and rumors are spreading that the CCP is behind it, and that it has deployed personnel and equipment to help the Myanmar military strengthen its control over the internet. There are also photos on the internet showing staff unloading several boxes of goods from a flight, which are suspected to be technical equipment used by China to help disconnect the internet. The Chinese embassy in Myanmar issued a statement saying that the round-trip flights between China and Myanmar were carrying seafood and other goods. This concludes today's broadcast. Thank you for your time, and stay tuned for the next headline news.